Lars, thank you so much for being with us for the 22nd Happiness Happens Month. So you and I have known each other, for really quite a while, and you've been kind of connected to the society for quite a while. You even did our website at one point. So I just appreciate you being here. So Lars is a writer of historical fiction, particularly around the Revolutionary War. And so I thought there was no better person to talk to us about nostalgic happiness, because he's constantly looking at history, and so anyway, that's why I invited you here. And so I want to, like I said, thank you for joining us, and I want to let you share some you can even make them personal or professional or a combo of both, about how you view nostalgia and how it does give you some happiness.
I'm very glad to be here, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to share my thoughts on on the topic of happiness. Nostalgia is one of those things that it can be a two-edged sword. It can cause you to feel unhappy because you don't have something that you used to have, but at the same time, it can bring you joy in remembering that you have had certain experiences. I grew up in a house where we had thousands upon thousands of books, including books that wonderful aroma of vanillin that you get from old books. That was the aroma of my childhood. I mean, literally walking through the halls in my house, it was like that. So I grew up with placing a lot of value on the past and on history, and so it was natural for me to move into writing about history. And one of the things that I've learned as I've studied this particular era in history, and as I've learned more about the people who lived then, is that while we like to think that it was a simpler time. That's a phrase that gets bandied about. But in fact, it was every bit as complex as our own time, just in different ways. They didn't have iPhones, but they did have new developments in technology, and of course, many new developments in philosophy and in government and so forth, that made their lives every bit as complicated as ours are, just in different ways. So as far as nostalgia for the past goes, I love getting dressed up in the clothing of the era, because it feels very sort of stylish and everything. You put the waistcoat on and and the hat.
Okay, so I have to ask, when you're in your writing zone, do you wear clothing of the era, or do you wear your sweats like the rest of us?
Yeah, no. When I'm writing, I'm as comfortable as I can possibly be.
Okay.
But when I'm doing a public event, this past weekend for July 4th, I actually got to present the Declaration of Independence in full costume, which was wonderful. I had a really lovely audience at a small town here nearby where I live, and to be able to present those thoughts, sort of evoking the sense of the era with those words that many people have never actually read all the way through the Declaration. They're familiar with the that we hold these truths to be self-evident part, but they skip right past the list of grievances, which kind of give the lie to the idea that the revolution was all about tax evasion or whatever. It was about a lot more. And they skip past the part at the very end where these men who signed this Declaration of Independence, for all their flaws, and they were human, they did not live up to the ideals that they were putting forth, and they knew that.
We rarely do.
we rarely do, but the fact is that they gave us a mark to aim for, and they pledged their lives to that, and their fortunes and their sacred honor. And that, to me, that's inspirational. So if I'm going to,
do you have a favorite founding father?
oh goodness, that's a great question. I like John Adams just because he was a an irritable old cuss, and made no bones about it. But I think the founding father who I really have tremendous respect for, and who's often overlooked, is a gentleman named Dr. Warren. He was active in Boston as a patriot, you know, as a thought leader during the Revolution, and he was actually involved in treating some of the victims of the Boston Massacre. You know, he was in it from the beginning, if I'm remembering correctly. But you know, he was very much that sort of philosophical leader. And then when the British took Boston and were being besieged at what is incorrectly called the Battle of Bunker Hill, but was actually on Breed's Hill, he basically enlisted as a private soldier. Although he could have claimed, you know, the rank of an officer and could have been a leader, he said, no, I can be of more use as a private. And he was killed in that battle. So Joseph Warren, you know, if he had lived, I'm really convinced that he would have been thought of the same way that we think of George Washington, in terms of being one of those people without whom the revolution could not have succeeded. And you know, I think it was Voltaire who said the graveyards are full of indispensable men. And you know, Joseph Warren is one of those indispensable men who, you know, as it turned out, the time was right for the sort of men who did lead the revolution to rise. And you know, we were fortunate that there were some who were particularly capable. So yeah, Joseph Warren is somebody who I'm glad to see him getting a little bit more attention these days. A couple of my fellow novelists of the Revolution are writing about him. I don't tend to write about historical figures, so I'm unlikely to try to take him on. But you know,
that was gonna be my next question. Is he in one of your books?
He is not, I avoid writing about historical figures for a couple of reasons. Number one, many of them have been written about a great deal. And so, you know, I feel like there are probably people who do a better job of exploring those stories of the well-known figures than I do. I look at the work of like Steph Dre and Laura Camoy with their books, and they do an amazing job, and it is an incredible amount of work.
Yeah.
And then the other reason is that I feel like it's much easier to relate to a story about somebody who is more like you and I. You know, somebody who's just an ordinary person trying to get through these extraordinary times. And even more importantly, I think what we can learn from studying the stories of ordinary people, that you don't have to make it into the history books in order to make history. And you know, over and over and over again, I find this. You know, you have this anonymous person who did this thing that changed the course of the war, and you know, what I hope that reminds my readers of is that we don't have to get into the history books ourselves. We don't have to be, you know, one of these great figures astride our white horses, you know, being a hero to change the future. We just have to quietly do the right thing as often as.
You know, and that's what we call honorable, which is also one of the 31 types of happiness, because sometimes being honorable isn't always easy, yet it's that thing that, you know, gives our conscience that the freedom to you know, not have regrets, because we know
Right.
we did the right thing. So I think we kind of combined questions 1 and 2, because we got into your stuff, so that's great. So as a final question, I do want to say that one of your books, I think by the time this airs, it will have already happened, but it'll probably be online. One of your books is actually going to be a play.
Yes.
So that's super, super, super exciting. I suspect you'll make the big screen at some point. So for our next question, in my new book, Practical Happiness, one of the principles is happiness is personal. And I do think because of social media, and actually it really started with texting, we live in this very much world of, like I said, groupthink. We even have competitive happiness, but we sometimes forget that our happiness also has to be personal. So it might not be something your spouse is into, or your kids, or your friend, your buddies, or even your fellow historical dress up people who like
Right.
to go out. And what is, aside from your historical interests, what is one of your happinesses personals?
I think probably the best example is my obsession with clocks. And I have over a dozen cuckoo clocks on the walls in the house. I have probably another dozen other clocks around. And let's just say that they make me very happy, and most other people in the house sort of tolerate them at best.
They're happy that you're happy.
Right, right. And the thing that I love about working on old clocks, it ties back into that nostalgia idea. Because when I work on a clock that's, 70 years old or 100 years old, and I have several that are in that sort of range, I'm keenly aware that the men who built those clocks are no longer with us. And by keeping those beautiful little devices running smoothly, I'm keeping their legacy alive.
I love that.
Yeah, and I also love the fact that you've got these amazingly complex devices and not a microchip in sight. nobody's cheating by writing code. You have to get all of the little bits and pieces to line up correctly, or else the whole thing is just not going to work. And that to me is a great analogy for how life works. You have to get all the little bits and pieces sort of lined up, and there's some slop. You can have a little bit of variance, but the more you vary it, the greater the chance is something's going to work differently than was intended. I won't say it's going to malfunction, but it's going to work differently than intended.
That is, I love that. Do you happen to have any clocks from the Revolutionary War time frame?
I do not personally. I grew up in a house that had a lot of old things in it. And one of the things that we have is a clock that, as close as I can date it, dates from just about the time of the Revolution. It's made in London, beautiful,
Oh, wow.
old bracket clock that is probably worth more than all my clocks put together.
Wow. So does your family still have it?
Yes, and it's been in the family for probably that whole time. We have photos from 100 years ago with that clock sitting in it, in the background with the family. So yeah, it's truly a family heirloom.
Oh, that I love that. I hope one day it graces some spot in your household. So
Well, I'm not looking forward to that day, but yes, that it will come.
yeah, that it's well, it's, again, like you said, sometimes nostalgia is a double-edged sword.
Absolutely.
There's a double-edged piece to it, but I just love that it's so old.
Yep.
So thank you for being here with us for Happiness Happens Month, and I know you and I will stay in touch like we always do. And
Absolutely.
like I said, thank you so much.
Very glad to share this with you, and I appreciate you inviting me.